So in this video, I'm going to talk about my experiences with the NHS and psychoses, about when I first reached out for help, um, to get help with the condition that I was experiencing. And the first time I ever had help was when I was hospitalized and taken to the emergency ward. So I'm not going to talk about that because that was kind of really an experience all in of itself that wasn't me reaching out for help, but it was more me being taken to the emergency ward, telling the doctors, being honest with them what was going on, and then being put into a psychiatric hospital. So that's not really me reaching out. But the second time I went to hospital was because I was previously living in an abandoned building, and I used to go to this pub to charge my phone and everything like that. And there was this old man there who saw me charging up my phone. He eventually struck up a conversation with me and was like, "Hey, what's going on? You're in here a lot. Is everything? How's things going?" And then he, after a while of getting to know him and the oldies that were there, the oldies and goldies as I call them, after a while of getting to know them, he offered me a room in his house and offered to get, to sort the deposit, first month's deposit for me. And I remember feeling like, oh my god, this is my opportunity, because I was in an abandoned building and it was like just the end of winter, and it was so cold, and I just wanted to get out of that place. And I thought, okay, I'm going to go there. Got a job, and unfortunately, then the stress of the job. It's usually what would happen that would keep me on the streets. The stress of the job. I kept hearing voices that were so loud they were like coming through the headset, because there's another call center, because I didn't have any qualifications. I don't have any qualifications. So, no A levels or anything like that, and what have you. So I could never get good jobs. But anyway, the stress of call centers, I don't know if you've ever worked in one, but oh my God, you have to take like 260 calls a day. And I would always start reading codes in all of the not license plates, but all of the postcodes of the addresses that come up on screen, and then trying to work out what the names meant on all the telephone systems, and someone's attitude wouldn't line up to what I thought would be, so it'd be about me and all this stuff. So call centers are really stressful, high-paced, stressful environment. And anyway, that triggered off my psychosis, so I had an episode, and I had to quit, unfortunately. But I was so tired of this cycle, which had been going on for like 4 years at this point, of like getting a job, having an episode, having to quit, be on the streets, all that stuff. It was really difficult. And so I was really disappointed with letting the guy who, won't say his name, but the guy who let me in down. So upset with that. I was like, I can't let him down. So I went to hospital. Not hospital, but I rung up the doctors and I said, look, this is what's happening. And they made an appointment with me. The first appointment at the hospital, I went into it because I was still in this kind of like psychosis episode, but I was also feeling like emotionally like I was letting this guy down. I wasn't perceiving reality properly, but I was lucid enough to know that I don't want to be dealing with what's going on anymore. But unfortunately, when I first sat in the room, there was a lady, another lady, and then a guy there. And I remember thinking, oh my God, this has been orchestrated. They've matched these people up to look like people from the past, so that they are in the best people to help me in this moment. Like, this is the help I'm going to get. They're finally going to I can't remember what it was, but I was convinced that they were going to reveal something to me. The stress of thinking all of that in that moment, I just started breaking down. I was crying. I just couldn't get a hold of myself. And I kind of went into this thing that used to happen a lot, which is, I think, a catatonia. I spoke to about another therapist, and I don't know, because I've never had a diagnosis, because I've never stayed long enough or been honest enough to have a diagnosis. Apart from being told by a counsellor once that I was experiencing psychosis symptoms, I've never actually had a proper diagnosis. But I was frozen there, and I remember just being kind of stuck, just so upset. And then the guy moves his foot, just sort of like scrapes it along the carpet. And I had a really bad memory about someone that used to do that. They used to scrape their foot along the carpet, and that kind of like snapped me out, made me a little bit angry, I suppose. And then I remember telling them I lied again. Yeah, thinking about that, I lied to them. And I know it's difficult in those meetings because it felt so cold and sterile. That's what the problem was with it. When I was breaking down crying, no one offered me a tissue. No one said, "Are you okay?" It was just the guy who'd scraped his foot even ended up going, "Look, what's going on?" But in an impatient way. And it kind of just invoked this anger in me again. And it's so disappointing because unfortunately, every time I've gone for help like that, I've been faced with someone that's just fed up. And I get it, like all the people that kind of go into these places are a lot on the system that's already struggling, especially the NHS. But when you're especially suffering from psychosis, the biggest problem with psychosis is trust, and you don't want to trust people that are fed up with you. So anyway, I kind of just lied a bit to them. I was like, I didn't want to tell them because I knew the first time I told people about what was happening to me, they put me in a hospital for 3 days. So there was no way I was going to be honest again. So I just told them, look, I'm hearing some stuff, but I'm okay. Like there's this. And then they kind of let me go from that appointment, and then I came back for another appointment. This time I spoke to a counsellor who I adored him. I thought he was like amazing. I trusted him. And so I told him some stuff, unfortunately. And then he told me that I have to come back. And I didn't want to come back, but they said that the police would be involved if I didn't come back. So again, that felt really unemotional and a little bit forceful. But anyway, I went back, and this time I spoke to a psychiatrist. The psychiatrist was terrible. They wanted to put me on antipsychotics, and they wanted to weigh me and all this sort of stuff. So they took me into another room, and they wanted to give me an injection of an antipsychotic. But I was like, I don't want that. In my way, intuitively, if you think about it, how I felt about it, I've had this experience where the one guy scraped his foot across the carpet and been impatient with me. No one's tried to settle me down when I'm crying. Why am I going to want an injection of medication from people, that intrusion into me from people that haven't showed me any basic empathy yet? And when I have trusted someone who's showed me empathy, I've been threatened with the police if I don't return to the place. I get that people can do some really bad things, but the way it makes you feel as someone that genuinely is reaching out for help, it makes you feel like you cannot trust these people. And I think that paranoia that they have of you rubs off on you. And with psychosis, you're naturally a paranoid person. And so their paranoia becomes an even worse paranoia in you, and God, you're not trusting them. And so I said no to the injection. And then the psychiatrist sat down and he talked about things and all this stuff. And I ended up going on 3 different types of antipsychotics, but I got really bad side effects from them. During the trying out of these antipsychotics, I did go for a CBT appointment. I didn't want to go on the buses or anything at that time because I was terrified people were going to try and kill me, or that I'd be seen going to one of these places and all this stuff. So I got drove there by one of the counsellors. The problem is, the way that they kind of messed this up is that when he was taking me there, on the radio, he must have had his podcast or something playing, but it said "They Walk Among Us," and it just set me off before I even got to the place. So I'm trying to go in to meet this woman for CBT, and I'm like, who's among us? He's trying to communicate. He's trying to tell me something. Who's among us? Who's among us? And so I was trying to keep it together, and then I go in there, and I had a horrible experience with her because I'm in this like weird state. I don't really want to talk. I don't know what I need to say. I've always had this issue, not always, but when I was in my early 20s, I had this problem with like mutism kind of thing where I couldn't talk, just wasn't able to get my words out. And so I'm kind of trying to get to grips with what's going on. I can't remember much of it, but she got frustrated, and I remember because it was really exaggerated. She rolled her eyes at me. And I just felt, again, my reality in terms of the words and imagery of what was happening with me didn't make any sense. But the way that I felt from other people seemed to make a lot more sense. I seemed to have this feeling about things that did make sense. There was people, even when I was in the midst of psychotic episodes, that I called antipsychotics in themselves, because there was this one person that I knew that I could be really going through it, and she'd be there. And then it would be like I wasn't psychotic anymore. It would be like she was like this grain of truth. And she was actually one of the most blunt and offensive people I've ever met in my life. But it was like, oh my God, if there was something that I didn't know about. She would just be like, look here, you're an absolute problem, like you probably should just not exist, but you know, she'd tell me. And so she was like an antipsychotic in a way. But um when she rolled her eyes at me, I felt like I didn't want to be there anymore, and I got fed up with it. So I complained to the psychiatrist at this point, and I said, look, I don't want to be on the medication, and I don't want the CBT. I kind of wanted psychotherapy, and I don't know if I asked him for that or not, because I wasn't all well together during this point, and it's very blurry and fuzzy, because it felt like it was all happening so quick. But I don't remember what I fully said to him. I wasn't rude. I was trying my best to be polite, but I just said, this isn't working for me. None of this stuff's working for me. And he said, I'll never forget this, because it angers me so much. But he looked at me and said, have you thought about getting a girlfriend? And for some reason, that put the idea in my head. And then I ended up in a tough relationship where in the first few months, I walked in on her with another person in our room, you know, cheating. And it took me like years to recover from that. But I don't think I recovered from that relationship, actually. But yeah, that was the end. Once he said that to me, I started lying just to say I'm okay now. I feel fine, like everything's all right again. And then I got discharged from there with a letter and everything. But then I never sought help again after that, and I just lived in psychosis or a drug-induced schizophrenia, I think it was, for the next 7-8 years up until last year, when I kind of finally clicked that everything made sense to me about my condition and what I was suffering from. Because, you know, the whole time I've been trying to research this and try to figure out what's going on for myself. But yeah, that's my story, reaching out with the NHS. And maybe I was just very unlucky, but mental health has a lot to live up to, I think, in the UK, and we just don't get the help that we need. I think a friend of mine, she had some really bad problems. She was born with, I won't say actually, but she was born with some really bad problems. And she said to me once, just like, at least I feel like unless I'm physically throwing my feces at the wall and screaming and hurting myself, I don't get any help. I can't remember what she said. I just get ignored. That's it, you know, and I completely feel that. It's just a horrible state of affairs in the UK with the NHS and mental health. I think we spend something like 300 billion a year on mental health in the UK. Crazy. Anyway, thanks for watching my video. I hope that wasn't too heavy. Have a great day.